Okay, it is about almost 9 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on Wednesday, November the 3rd, 2021. And welcome to week number 6. This is the final lecture for this class. And the reason why we're doing this lecture so late is because of the fact that next week the course actually ends. It ends on the 9th. And so I wanted to make sure that I gave you enough information for week 6 so that you will be able to have enough time to get the assignments completed, uh, because it would not make, well, first of all, number one, I can't do a Wednesday lecture when the class ends on Tuesday of next week. So there's no other way to do this. I could have given you later this week, but I wanted to give you at least as much information. Those of you who are going to be looking at the recording, of course, because notice that this time there's none of you here, but that was the same with week 5. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and provide you with the information that you need. Okay, again, you can see the calendar, and you can see that the written assignments for week 6 are due on the 9th. Both the initial posts and the reply posts. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have the initial post and reply post. And if you look at this, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's the initial post. There is the reply post. There's the written assignment and the key phrase that are all due on that night that the course ends at 11:59 p.m. If you clicked on that, it tells you. So the course ends. All right. So now let's go to the announcement. Week 6 announcement is that Module 6, Correctional Philosophies, will be discussed, and you deal with sentencing and correctional facilities, philosophies, evidence-based correction practices and best practices, and I um, hmm, let's see, I think, did I get the right one? I think I did. Let me make sure I got the right one because it says the first. Uh, yeah, I did. But actually, the lecture for week 6 is actually not, that's not correct. Let me fix that. I don't know. Well, that's not the reason why people aren't here. Uh, Wednesday, November 3rd. Okay, I'm glad I got that corrected. Okay, so post now. Okay, so anyway, let's go back. So the lecture is taking place tonight, and we went a little longer than 8:30 because I waited a little bit for the first lecture and I had to convert the other one. Discussion assignment, rehabilitation improvements. And of course, as I said, both of these are due on Tuesday. And it reminds you of that as well here. And then your written assignment, rehabilitation, is also due along with your key phrase, and take time to do the end of quarter evaluation. All right. All right. So now let's go right to Module 6, Correctional Philosophies. So let's first deal with the assignments. So you're going to deal with this scenario here, and you're going to conduct research from the module as well as from the Rasmussen library to deal with current techniques used to treat mental illness, addiction, lack of education, and other problems within the prison system. And then, if possible, you don't have to conduct a phone interview with the warden. Don't worry about that prison administrator to determine what practices are currently used. That's a plus if you do that. Don't worry about that. You won't be losing points if you're not able to do that. Develop 2 additional methods by which you think rehabilitation could be accomplished within a prison resource from the community for non-violent offenders. Then in a 2 to 3 page paper, APA formatted, which means it's a cover page, a reference page, it's double spaced, citations in the body, and references at the end. So discuss current techniques used by the prison that you contacted or researched, as well as 2 additional ideas to help accomplish rehabilitation techniques being used to treat individuals with mental illness, addiction, lack of education, and other problems within the prison system. Be sure that the procedures or practices are feasible and don't require an increase in funding or correction manpower. All right, it's a Word document. Word document. Let's take a look at the rubric. Okay, there it is. So, examination of current techniques. Provide a clear and comprehensive examination of current techniques used to treat mental illness, addiction, lack of education, and other problems. Discuss the techniques. Clear and comprehensive discussion of the techniques used by the prison contacted or researched. Clear and comprehensive discussion of 2 additional ideas to help accomplish rehabilitation. Remember citations throughout the body. If you don't, you're going to end up in emerging and you're going to lose half the points. So you don't want to do that. We've already had this discussion. So as you probably already know, my position on rehabilitation. All right. Because I talked about that in many classes that you were in. If you were in the contemporary issue, not contemporary issues. Well, yeah, this class here, I talked about it in other classes, but I also talked about it in Introduction to Corrections. So now the discussion. And so you're going to use these 2, St. Cloud and Philadelphia. So you're going to recognize that you need to review the demographics for St. Cloud and Philadelphia, compare and contrast the differences between the 2 constructive suggestions for how they could improve their efforts to rehabilitate offenders. Be sure to reference the name of the institution, which one you're referring to, and then your reply post respond to a peer's initial post whose suggestions for how the prisons would improve their efforts to rehabilitate is different from yours. And then, both of those are due by Tuesday, the 9th. Okay. So now let's get into the body of this. Okay, so let's talk about individuals in terms of of the philosophy of sentencing. So, as I said many times, that there are various practices dealing with rehabilitation, retribution, deterrence, and incapacitation. Now, I'm going to save rehabilitation for last. Retribution is paying back the individuals, maybe with amounts of fines, or either by believing that the time that you serve should be able to uh, put you in a position where you will think about it because it costs you, because time you can't get back. Deterrence, on the other hand, is thinking about the time that you're away, that it deters you from becoming a recidivist. Now, we already know that this does not work well at all because people are constantly operating with revolving doors when it comes to prison. Incapacitation is where they're taken out of the system, being with the public and the community, and placed for a number of years. So then they are going to come back out, and they may come out, as I usually say, with more of criminal nature, because I always have said that prison and jails are two places where you can learn more about crime than on the streets, because you have people who've been in there a long time who will indoctrinate you, and you will find yourself, even if you're innocent going in, to survive in the environment that you're in, you might adapt to those habits, and then when you are released or exonerated, you just bring them with you. So that brings me back to the one that is so important, and it's the topic of this week: rehabilitation. I have talked about in my previous classes about how individuals need to do a 180 and change their lives. So let's take the clock. No, not the digital one, but the one that says 12 at the top, then 3 at the quarter point, 6 at the midway point, 9, and then back to 12. So we start out at 12 with the problem that brought us there in the first place, and we begin to utilize assistance dealing with the problems that the individual have that led them there. And most of the time it's a combination of factors, maybe drug problems or alcohol problems, providing treatment for those individuals while they're incarcerated to help those individuals to shake those issues, because I've already said that drug addiction is a health problem. We deal with this opioid issue and dealing with heroin and overdoses and things of that nature. It is definitely a issue that is a serious health problem. But at the same time, those individuals commit crimes to support their habits, so they find themselves back in. So you need to deal with and address those. The same with the mental illness, getting the proper amount of help for individuals to bring them back. And then you have people who are both uh, substance abuse addicts and mental health problems. We have to address those to get those people. No matter how much time you give them, it's not going to change anything for those individuals unless you reach the stage where you deal with the problem that brought them there in the first place. So what you do is you begin to provide also vocational training. I've a friend who has a barber college, and he offers a program in prison and in jail here in Illinois that allows a person to learn how to cut hair and obtain even a license, so that when they're released, it gives them a trade. Same thing with electricians, people working in information technology, um, computers, and then also at the same time providing second chance opportunities as far as jobs are concerned, providing housing, the medical treatment that's necessary for people to live, good housing, and so forth. So anyway, that's the rehabilitation thing. Now, I, as an older person, would rather operate with the correction practice of rehabilitation because I want those individuals to come out and go in a new direction. Because otherwise, they're going to probably use me as a target because of my age. They might use a younger person as a target as well. But the point of the matter is that if they're rehabilitated, then that means then they have been uh, taken to a point where they change. So back to the clock. So when you get to 3, you're halfway through. But if you get to 6, you're facing a new direction, because when you're at 3, you can see where you came from, and then you can see where you got to go. You see the bad stuff that got you there and the good stuff that can help you. But by the time you get to 6, you can't see either one or the other. You can only see the good stuff that you're moving toward from 3. But you don't want to go beyond that because it will lead you ultimately up to 9 and back to 12, and you will be in a worse state than you were from the first time. Point of the matter is that 180 takes you in a new direction. It's kind of like, as I try to tell people, that if you drive a vehicle, your rearview mirror is there to see what's behind you, and you keep moving away, and what is behind you will disappear. It's not that it's not there anymore, but you have removed yourself from the environment, from the possibility of temptation, of falling back into the habits that got you there in the first place. So to the point that you actually have a new way of thinking and functioning as an individual, instead of being a detractor to the community, instead being a contributor in a positive fashion to the community. Okay, so I would say that rehabilitation probably would have the impact of reducing recidivism more than any other techniques. And so we'll talk about that. So to understand the philosophy, I'm going to read this now. It is first necessary to recognize the goals of correction, and we already talked about them. And the primary point is to treat the underlying cause of criminal behavior. Have I not said that? I did. And the key thing is to, as it says, rehabilitative efforts seek to change the thinking pattern of an offender so that they will not reoffend. That's what I said a few minutes ago. So during the first 70 years of the 20th century, we lived in the rehabilitative era, where it's pointed out that indeterminate sentencing um, judges had wider discretion to when to release individuals or parole an inmate when they were felt that they were ready to come out. And correction officials began to focus on the needs and try to help those individuals. And so it was the philosophy that the jails or prison were harsh and slum conditions, and it reminded them of some of the situations that they came out of. And so there's psychological damage that needs to be corrected, that we get into that mental health issue. Corrections has a duty, and I think to society and the community to treat individuals and to help them, not to punish them. And so you can lock up for years, but if you don't get to the core of the problem, you haven't accomplished anything. So the things that happened and the individuals um, that were on probation and parole were provided with treatment, and once they released back out in the community, the educational and vocational opportunities I talked about that were available to help those individuals and to cut into recidivism. Um, Talked about things that came about like funding, like the Pell Grant, complete education while in prison. Prosecutors at the same time were dealing with diversionary programs, and probation um, resulted in helping the individuals to matriculate better in the community. But violent or dangerous offenders weren't able to really take advantage of these. And then financing was an issue. So during the 60s, um, individual rights came in. And as I've said before, it is cheaper to educate than to incarcerate. I talk about a program that I participated in when I was practicing law, that one of the judges in the criminal courts building in Chicago, R. Eugene Pincham, and his probation officer, Harold Bailey, came out with this concept called probation challenge. And the idea was that individuals who came up before the judge, the individuals that came up before the judge were in situations where they were uh, um, offered the opportunity, if they did not have their general education diploma, GED, to get that and then have the case dismissed. And it worked pretty well, so much to the point that it became law, and it is currently still on the books in Illinois. And individuals in in that program generally were not recidivists, and they found themselves going further into GED. They'd get their associates, and then some even went further. And one I know became a lawyer. So, but there were a lot of problems that began to take place in the 60s, where the government had issues with the individuals that they were dealing with, and the rehabilitative efforts were being attacked, and questions about the fairness, and then turned into what we call just desserts. And what just desserts meant is that individuals get what they it's like you reap what you sow, or that's biblically, but what goes around comes around, and that whatever the crime that you do, you should have the commensurate amount of time. And so there were civil rights issues, there were disturbances, and all kind of rebellion that took place in the prison facilities. And so the 70s brought about the crime control philosophy. Um, the government wasn't trusted. The correction officers were seen as the enemy, and it demanded that indeterminate sentences be eliminated. And then more and more jurisdictions went to determinate sentencing. Illinois was one that I worked on in 1977, when we went from indeterminate to determinate sentencing. But the judges were almost locked out of the picture in terms of determining. They had to follow what the legislature had issued as far as sentencing. And even if a person did well, they still had to stay that amount of time. But the key thing is that people knew how much time that they were going to get. They knew how long they were going to be there. And some say that it adversely affected the ability of those individuals to want to change their ways, because it didn't matter whether they changed their ways or not, they would still be there for that same period of time. So um, this led us to retributive philosophy, which we see as relating to the just desserts that I talked about, that the punishment must fit the crime. And there was elimination of indiscriminate sentencing and rehabilitation. So guess what? It resulted in more crime. It resulted in high recidivism rate, and it resulted in individuals finding themselves not being taken to 6 o'clock, but just dealing with them at 12 o'clock for a certain period of time and then getting them out. Many of us advocating a return back to rehabilitation, because that's the one that will give us the greatest amount of results. Not everybody's going to respond to that, because you can't operate on the basis that everybody's going to do what they're supposed to do. So let's go to the evidence-based correctional practices. So what happened is we began to try to come up with ways of making prison more towards rehabilitation, and dealing with rehabilitation from day one for offenders. And as it says here, correction officials admit that rehabilitation is a mindset of the offender, making it necessary to get the offender to change their behavior. So today's prisoners are exposed more to the rehabilitative process the moment that they arrive, just like I said, and continue working on that until they leave. And evidence-based practices meant to work on reform, focus on the research and clinical knowledge, such as rehabilitation of offenders, to increase and increasing public safety. So the key thing is that when you rehabilitate someone, you're at the same time increasing public safety. And so it provides a change in those individuals. And it says, based on these practices, all correction personnel, from officers to wardens, team up to contribute to the goal of rehabilitation. Thank you. And so it is very, very, very important for us to continue as individuals in criminal justice to recognize that we are to be more professional. That is why correction officers are now required in many instances to have more than a high school diploma, have some associate's degree and or a bachelor's. And so we want to try to get individuals by meeting them where they are and bringing them to where we'd like them to go to. But we provide services and resources to help those individuals to get it. I oftentimes say prison is like a hospital for sick people, and you have to treat the thing that brought them there to keep them out of there or heal them. And that's what I talk about when I advocate going and doing a 180 and going in a new directions, transitioning the individuals so they can be positive role models in the community, as opposed to the opposite. Okay. The National Institute of Corrections says that the evidence-based practices are described as the objective, balanced use of research, and the best available data to guide policy and practice decisions that outcomes for consumers are improved. So what that really means is that we deal with the issues that those individuals have, and we find out that statistically that to get the best possible results, we treat them for what brought them there in the first place. Okay. Again, to decrease the desire or the result of repeat offenders or recidivists. One of the first approaches currently used in federal correction facilities is to start on day one by dealing with what they call the offender's criminogenic needs. And what that means is that we begin to find out the underlying cause of the antisocial behavior that those individuals had developed that got them there in the first place. And it is quite clear that if you do any research, you find out that it says research shows that inmates who take advantage of educational opportunities while in prison are 43% less likely to recidivate. That's what I've been saying. Cheaper to educate than to incarcerate, and talked about programs like probation challenge. Graduating from from college while in prison, that's a unique concept. And some people argue, say, well, they get a free education. Well, the point of the matter is that they will then come out more likely to be a contributing individual to society, tax paying, law abiding, and getting closer. I didn't say all now, okay? So you want to make sure that those opportunities are provided there for those. And then the Federal Prison Initiative Job Training Program helps individuals to deal with jobs. And it says inmates who held jobs in prison in the past being 24% less likely to recidivate. The point of the matter is you don't just give them making license plates and stuff like that. You give them things that they can learn themselves. Like I told you, the barber thing, those kinds of things. Working on vehicles, mechanics, electricity, and dealing with computers, and those areas. And then they talk about the Pell Grant that came out and provide money to cover those kind of things as well. And so there are constantly new opportunities. In addition to education, mental health disorders are addressed. That's what I've said. You can educate a person who has a mental health disorder or a drug problem, and it's still not going to help them any. But the key thing is to get into their minds and get them convinced that you are helping them. Again, it provides an opportunity for many correction facilities to be like hospitals, mental health facilities, and to deal with residential drug abuse programs, and then helping the individuals to develop family ties with visitation. And so there are some bad sides to that, but it has been shown that the more you're exposed to your family, unless you have one of those crime families, like I had some people like that I represented, but there are events that happen, and there are some things like conjugal visits where spouses are able to come and be with them periodically while incarcerated. Another way is dealing with the halfway houses. It says since 80% of released inmates must pass through these houses, it's important that they have clear standards to operate. Finally, as I conclude this section, it talks about the need for some things I talked about earlier: employment, housing, and school education, and provide identification such as Social Security cards. Let me tell you something. You will be surprised that individuals who have never had an ID card or a Social Security card because they didn't work. Many of them have either never seen their birth certificates or don't know how to get their birth certificates. Photo identification to help individuals when they're heading toward opportunities. So there's costs that go with that. And so the key thing is that the prisons themselves uh, have funds that they begin to receive to help pay for those things. All right. All right. So let's conclude with the best practices. And we've already kind of elaborated on them, so it's not going to take much to talk about this. A lot of research, paying attention to how individuals respond after that, increase opportunities to rehabilitate individuals so that those individuals are able to go in that new direction, get more towards 6, removing them from 12 o'clock on that clock I talked about. And so it's important, but there's some challenges that go with that. And here are what they are. Because of the fact that they don't have the funds, then the programs oftentimes have wait lists for individuals who need to have some of these programs right away. And this says 3 has a flawed approach to measuring performance, which makes it difficult to determine whether existing program resources are being used effectively. So the key thing is this, is that the facilities must utilize the best possible efforts to use the evidence-based practices that are learned to correct these issues and to provide the funding and provide the staffing so that individuals will be able to be helped. It's like going into a hospital with not enough doctors and nurses, those kinds of things. So to correct the challenges, the legislative analysis recommends: 1, funding. The correctional facility must show what programs are evidence-based and are evaluated, and the ones that reduce recidivism are at the top. Independent researchers continue to evaluate the costs of the programs again, and inmates who are using the programs and complete them and their likelihood of recidivism. You want to decrease that, of course. 3, committee put into place to review what offenders are going to be the highest risk and need probably more aggressive help in terms of rehabilitation. So if the high risk people are the ones who probably need the most aggressive form of programming to help them. And then correctional facility must improve the use of the current rehabilitation programs. Notice it's all about rehabilitation, all about that. California prison inmates reoffend at an alarming rate, it says. 43% who are released will reoffend within 3 years. So the key thing that California has to do is take the initiative to implement evidence-based practices that will change that trend. Very important. So we're near the end and dealing with the criminogenic factors. that contribute to criminal behavior. What is it that brought them there to them in the first place? What do we need to do to deal with antisocial behavior, personality, relationships, their minds, criminal minds, criminal thinking, poor family connections, low or no school work or performance, drugs or alcohol abuse, shows that these can be effectively addressed and rehabilitated, but we must continue to increase our direction to improve the resources and provide more and more resources to help us to rehabilitate individuals, because as it says here, it is a win-win situation for all. It reduces public assistance. People don't have to go into public aid roles. And then one of the biggest advantages to inmate rehabilitation can't be measured in dollar amounts, but rather in the safety of the inmate and officers, as the more they're educated and treated, are less likely to be violent offenders and make the facility and the community that they return to feel much safer. Okay, that's it for me. I do want to give you a key phrase. If you've been paying attention to this lecture, and if you were here, I would ask you, and probably some of you or one of you would come up with rehabilitation, and that's it. Rehabilitation is so important. And like I said again, it's a philosophy that the further you go in your education dealing with corrections, the more you're going to learn the importance of that. And so I encourage you, as you continue as a criminal justice professional in law enforcement, or as a lawyer, or as a counselor, that you begin to deal with those issues. My daughter, she's a clinician, a clinical psychologist that deals with inmates in Cook County Jail. And I've heard about stories about situations where some of the most basic things that you might think of and take for granted, that those individuals either never been exposed to and been deprived. And so we need to deal with that. The key thing is get into this thing up here. And then I always say, get it into this, but ultimately settle for what's in the heart. So that if your heart is towards doing the right thing, then your mind will follow. And then that'll be the thing that you desire to do. You might still have temptations, but it'll give you the ability to eliminate them. So give me that phrase, rehabilitation, and you will get your points for week number 6. Well, it's been a pleasure teaching this course again. I hope that you have learned quite a bit, and that I will see you down the road. I have students that reach out to me constantly for recommendations, and I'm proud to say that everybody that I have had to do recommendations for have gotten jobs, to my knowledge. And sometimes not always the job they want, but I tell them to be patient, and that opportunity will come. But I'm here for that in case you need me after that. Many of my friends on Facebook at Richard Wright JD communicate and connect with me on that. All right, so I will see you down the road. And I would say enjoy your break, but there's really not a break, because the course ends on Tuesday and term 2 begins on Wednesday. So good night, stay safe, and be well.